mic here.
I cannot wait. Okay, we're live back on March 1st, Wednesday, Senate Government Operations. And we have shifted our attention to the bill about sheriff reforms. And we have a new draft and we're gonna just, oh my gosh, it has a lot of yellow on it, Tim. We're gonna go through the new draft, which for those who are following along at home should be on our website now. It was delayed because we have a lot of balls in the air and drafts in the works. So thank you, Tim. Why don't you just go through it fairly and high level. There's a lot of stuff that was already there. And then if we have detailed questions, we can come back to the sections. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you very much, Chair Hardy. For the record, my name is Tim Devlin, Legislative Counsel, and I'll just start by giving a very high level rundown of the changes in what you have before you is for draft 2.3 of the strike all amendment to the Senate Bill 17. Changes have been highlighted just so that you can they'll pop out of what has been modified since the last iteration that came before this committee in its review. The categories of change are basically 5 topics. The first is sheriff contracting and sheriff duties, reworking the duty to assist survivors of domestic violence, restructuring of the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs, which, referring to DSAS throughout. If I do say that, that's what I'm referring to. Meaning, and then reworking some of the elements of the Sheriff's Department's funding oversight, administrative reporting. In particular, the Sheriff's contracting will specify that contract administrative overhead fees are not to exceed 5% and shall be used only for the cost of vehicles, uniforms, equipment, training, and professional services.
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry, I'm completely lost.
Oh, sure.
Sorry, you talked about all these topics, but that means you're not going through the bill as it's presented. Is that right? You're just bopping around to these different subjects?
I certainly can go through.
No, I just am puzzled by what you're doing. I mean, I'm trying to find where.
I think he's giving a high level overview and then we'll go through it section by section a little bit more in detail. Okay.
Got it. Okay. Thanks. I missed that part.
Let's see. So just summarizing the changes to sheriff contracting. First, the 5% fees, which shall be used for vehicles, equipment, things like that. Then also requiring a statewide contract for all county and state courthouses between the Sheriff's Executive Committee and the judicial branch. Quickly, sheriff's duties will be modified in this to include providing law enforcement and security services to county and state courthouses, maintaining records of work schedules, and compliance with standard operating procedures and policy manuals. Also skipping down to the restructuring of the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs, or DSAT. This essentially just moves statutory language pertaining to sheriff's executive commissions and state attorney's executive commission, not really changing the substance of it, but moving it. So although it's highlighted and looks like it's all changed, it's actually very much the same language as before. Just found a new home in statute. Also, the restructuring creates under DSAS 2 divisions: 1 division of sheriffs, 2 division of state's attorneys. And then you can go into the reporting features later. But returning to the bill and moving through top to bottom, you see the first area of highlights and changes in section 2, audits, and that's at the bottom of page 2, bringing across page 3. And so this language was in the previous iteration that the committee reviewed. However, you'll see a strike through through page 3. And what that is doing is really moving the executive committee language down further into the bill to be reorganized into a new statutory section, which would be 24 VSA section 313, and is now housed with the other DSAS related materials. Yeah. Moving on from there, the next area of substantial change is under sheriff contract and on page 6. And this is largely strikes what was already existing and then reenters new text with the effect of pointing out that there will be, in essence, maintain that 5% administrative fee that could be incorporated into contracts between sheriffs and other parties. However, it constrains the use of it to no longer be for supplementing salary or pay, really geared towards those costs necessary for departmental expenses not covered by the state or county funds, including the cost of vehicles, uniforms, equipment, training, and professional services. And Chair, if you'd like, I could read through this if you
Yeah, you
like.
can read
Okay.
through that
Sure.
language. That would be good.
Okay, so starting on line 16 of page 6, it's the amending Title 24 VSA Section 291A contracts. New language starting on line 16 reads, "A contract under this section may contain provisions for an administrative overhead fee at a rate not to exceed 5% of the contract. Funds derived from contract administrative overhead fees shall be kept in a separate account held by the Sheriff's Department and used by the Sheriff's Department only for the cost of necessary departmental expenses not covered by state or county funds, including the cost of vehicles, uniforms, equipment, training, and professional services. Funds derived from contract administrative overhead fees shall not be used for sheriff, deputy, or other departmental employee compensation, bonuses, salary supplements, retirement contributions, or employment benefits." I'll pause there.
Okay.
The next section, we have a subsection F of the same statutory section. And this regards sheriffs providing security services and law enforcement services to county and courthouses, county and state courthouses. And this mandates a contract between the Sheriff's Executive Committee and Judicial Branch. And I will read this starting on page line 6 as follows. An agreement or contract for sheriff departments to provide law enforcement or security services to county and state courthouses must be a single statewide contract for such services over all county and state courthouses between the Sheriff's Executive Committee and the Judicial Branch. The Sheriff's Executive Committee and the Judicial Branch shall negotiate terms that adequately address the costs of, there's a typo there, 2 ofs, providing law enforcement or security services by the Sheriff's Department to county and state courthouses. I'll pause there.
I think we need to keep that second of, but besides that, you know,
We'll tell the editors, you need 2 ofs there.
not as-
Okay. Carry on.
Turning now to sheriff deputies. And this is section 5, which amends Title 24 VSA Section 293 duties. New additional duties are, this is breaking from 7 into 8. And this will look familiar. The substance was discussed at the last time we were reviewing this material. And this just brings some of those wants onto paper, specifically requiring that there be there's 3 duties here. One regarding duty to assist domestic violence survivors. The other regarding maintaining work schedules of sheriffs. And then the third being that is complying with complying with provisions of standard operating procedures and manuals and policy manuals created and maintained by the Division of Sheriffs. And I could read through that new language, starting at the top of the page on line 1. New subsection B, a sheriff shall provide law enforcement and security services for county and state courthouses with the sheriff's county of jurisdiction in accordance with section 291A of this title. The sheriff shall maintain a detailed record of the sheriff's work schedule including workdays, leave taken, and any remote work performed outside the sheriff's district for a period of time for more than 3 days. D, each sheriff's department shall comply with the provisions of the standard operating procedures manual and policy manuals created and maintained by the Division of Sheriffs. And I should note here, actually, the duty to assist domestic violence survivors has actually been moved to Title 24 and will appear later on in the bill. I can get to that later on. But that's read in my notes.
And the standard operating procedures that will come up again later in the bill.
Yes, it will.
So, yeah. Go ahead.
I got a quick question.
Oh, go ahead, Bob.
I had a question too.
Oh, sorry, Allison. You go, Senator Norris first.
Line 4C, it says the sheriff shall maintain a detailed record of the sheriff's work schedule. Are we still talking about deputies? We're talking about the sheriff, him or herself.
This, as written, applies to the sheriff, the elected position.
And Senator, this was, you and I have chatted about this, and this is still up, well, I mean, obviously, everything's up for discussion still, but this was one of the recommendations that the department made about to include this as a possibility, but you and I have talked about some potential issues with it and everything, so, you know, it's in here mostly. And we can all have a conversation about whether we want to keep this in and what it might entail, but yeah. Go ahead, Senator Clarkson.
I mean, sorry, but I don't mean to be tense, but I mean, where does mutual aid come in? Where do all the other duties come in? This is just some. This isn't all.
You want to address what are the duties that are currently in statute that aren't here?
Sure.
I just want to make sure these are additional, not the sum total.
Yes, these would be supplementing what's already in statute.
Right. That's what I thought. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, okay. And we can certainly go through what those duties are if you want to think about what else we might need to add, or if you want to look at them. But I want to make sure that Tim gets through the bill first, and then we can come back to that if you want. Okay.
Okay. The next area of significant change is at the bottom of page 8, breaking into 9. And this modifies Title 24 VSA actually adds section 1944 regarding assisting domestic violence survivors. And we, if you'd like, I'd probably be easy just to kind of read through this, or I can.
Okay.
All right, so subsection A, law enforcement agencies and law enforcement officers shall have a duty to assist in the retrieval of personal belongings from the residence of an individual who has a relief from abuse order pursuant to Title 15 VSA section 1103 and that individual's dependents. Subsection B, the municipal police department, as defined in section 1931 of this title, providing law enforcement services for the location in which the individual who has a relief from abuse order resides, shall first perform the duty described in subsection A of this section. If the municipal police department is unable to perform this duty, the sheriff's department having jurisdiction of that location shall perform the duty described in subsection A of this section. If the sheriff's department is unable to perform the duty, the state police shall perform the duty described in subsection A of this section. Subsection C, law enforcement agencies and law enforcement officers shall not seek a fee from the individual being assisted in subsection A in the section or any representative of that person. I'll pause there.
Yeah, and so we, well, obviously we'll hear from the sheriffs, but we also we'll try to hear from the other law enforcement agencies and how this might work for them. So, all right, keep going.
Okay. And the next substantive changes really are at the bottom of 9, breaking into 10. And this regards the reorganizing of the Department of State's attorneys and sheriffs, or DSAS. Section 9, in particular, amends Title 24 VSA to add a new section 313. And I should state that many of this, again, much of this language was just relocated from other areas, and I'll try to point out any new language that is was created in that migration. Section 313, Sheriff's Executive Committee. This was something that was moved from 24 VSA section 290 before, and it's now reorganized into its own section for clarity's sake. If you'd like, I can read through that, or it's really the same as was before.
Yeah, I don't think you need to read through all this, just explain how it was reorganized.
Sure. Okay, then section 10, we have the repeal of the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs, and that's really a repeal and replace. The thinking behind that is it makes a little bit more sense to give it its own subchapter, and there were some added language that would merit just having it organized this way. And again, clarity's sake. Section 11 adds much of that back in and creates a new section for this that is particularly title 24 VSA, section 368. And that is titled State's Attorney's Executive Committee, as much the same. Section 12 adds an entire new subchapter 10 regarding Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs. In that, the new section 24 VSA 447, Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs. And this is somewhat modified, so I'll just read it here. And this is breaking across 10 into 11. It was established the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs, which shall consist of 2 divisions, the Division of State's Attorneys, which shall consist of the 14 state's attorneys, and the Division of Sheriffs, which shall consist of the 14 sheriffs. Next section is 448, Executive Director. Subsection A is new language. The head of the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs shall be the Executive Director. The Executive Director shall administer and direct the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs and the divisions of State's Attorneys and Division of Sheriffs. Moving on to subsection B, and this is somewhat modified language. Together, the Sheriff's Executive Committee and the State's Attorney's Executive Committee shall appoint an Executive Director who shall serve at the pleasure of the committees. The Executive Director shall be an exempt employee. And then C, the Executive Director may employ clerical staff as necessary. That's the same. Subsection D, Executive Director shall submit prepared budgetary materials. That is the same. E is also the same in regards to preparing funding requests to the governor and the General Assembly for the purpose of acquiring funds through appropriations. Turning to the top of page 12, new section is 449, Division of Sheriffs. This is relative, somewhat new language and mimics the language regarding state's attorneys. And I'll just read this through. A, at the beginning of each fiscal year, the Executive Director, with the approval of the Sheriff's Executive Committee, shall establish allocations for each of the Sheriff's Departments from the Sheriff's Department's appropriation. Thereafter, the Executive Director shall exercise budgetary control over these allocations in the general appropriation for sheriffs. Subsection B is migrated language and regards an individual sheriff in an instance of being aggrieved by the decision of the Division of Sheriffs pertaining to expenditure or expenditure of the sheriff.
Yeah, I don't think you need to read through this existing language. The only new, I think the next new thing is E, right?
Let me see.
The policies and best
yes,
practices, yeah.
So on line 17, subsection E reads, the Division of Sheriffs shall create and maintain policies and best practices to be included in standard operating procedures manuals and policy manuals. Each sheriff's department shall comply with the provisions of the standard operating procedures manuals and policy manuals.
And then the Division of State's Attorney, I think this is all existing language. We're not,
Yes, that
Yeah.
was moved. I think the only note I have is subsection C. Now replace the one of the terms. Let's see, the Division of State's Attorney shall provide centralized support services for state's attorneys with respect to budgetary planning, training, and office management, and perform such other duties as directed by the executive director.
yeah.
It had been the executive committee before that.
And just to note, I mean, the reason this reorganization is important because the department actually was created under, and to the sheriff's point, it was actually created under the state's attorney statutes. And so it was really a section of the state's attorneys, and this makes it its own section of the statute or subchapter of the statutes and has the two divisions. So is that accurate, more or less? Yeah. Okay, and then the last part is the report. So why don't we
Yes.
do that?
And this changes some of the parties who should be consulted. It does also adds, or actually I should say reworks some of the items to be reported on, really recommendations for legislative action on this. I'll just read through this from top to the bottom of page 13, breaking into 14. Reads, on or before January 15th, 2024, the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs, in consultation with the Sheriff's Executive Committee, Department of Human Resources, the Vermont Sheriff's Association, the State Auditor, and the Vermont Criminal Justice Council shall report to the House Committee on Government Operations and Military Affairs and Senate Committee on the Government Operations with findings and any recommendations for legislative action on: 1, creating and maintaining policies and best practices to be included in standard operating procedures, manuals, and policy manuals. 2, creating more efficient delivery of services provided by sheriff's departments in the state. And that concludes the new additional language. And I should say this deleted, the directive to point out how many
Yeah.
departments would be, as well as those precise boundaries. No longer.
All right, are there any questions for Tim? And Tim, before we lose you, I'm wondering if you could, and we'll hear from the sheriffs, but if you could send the language that's related to the statewide contract, the two sections to Judge Zone and blanking on name.
Yes,
Terry Corsones, and ask them if they have feedback on that.
Sure.
And then the language on the domestic violence or the relief from abuse order stuff. You and I should talk about who to send that to get some information. Senator Clarkson, do you have a question for Tim?
I do, or it's just a question of, my assumption is that the contract, it's a great idea to have kind of a model contract, but that each county has slightly different courthouse needs, obviously. So I assume that it might be that this is envisioned as a model contract that could be individualized per county. Is that, that is still under an umbrella of a whole contract that's negotiated, but still has 14 individualized aspects to it.
It could have individualized aspects to it, but the judiciary has specifically asked for a statewide contract that would cover all of the courthouses in the state.
Got it. I assume that's the big umbrella. I just assume that obviously, given each county has such different needs.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't get into the details of what would be in the contract, but they are very eager to have a statewide contract to make sure that there's security at each of the courthouses and don't have to negotiate 14 different contracts.
Got it. I assumed, and to add to our list for the domestic violence piece, you may want to have the victims advocates look at it who are in the state's attorney's offices.
Okay.
That's the court,
That's-
and
yeah.
obviously the network as well.
Yeah, the network is the one who brought it to us, the issue, so we'll send it for sure to the network,
Right.
but also to yeah, and Tim and I will talk about that.
The victims advocates are the ones that deal with victims in court, that are in court working with the state's attorney.
Yeah. All right. So are you able to stay for maybe 15 minutes until, do you have to?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And we are gonna move on to, I think we just have, Mark and Roger together. Although Roger, you're supposed to be zooming in, so,
You're gonna take them out?
Oh, no, I'm just kidding. That's just what I know to say. But you're here. So if you want, do you want to sit together or do you?
May I cede my chair to Sheriff Jen Merle?
Sure.
Orleans County, Utah. From her.
Sure. Do you have your?
I've not had a chance to look at this, just heard what Tim has
Yeah,
said.
you've been focusing on dispatch, which I super appreciate. So yeah, Jen, if you want to come on up to the table. And we'll introduce ourselves, although, wait, okay, good, we still have Allison, so I was worried we didn't have a quorum, but we do. So I'm Senator Ruth Hardy, I represent the Addison District.
Olivia Parker, committee assistant.
Tony Vihovsky, Chittenden Central.
This is Rebecca White from the Windsor District.
Bob Norris, Franklin County.
And then there's Ann Watson, who had to leave for childcare issues, and then, go
And
ahead.
then Allison Clarkson, Windsor County District. Home with COVID. One of the 5 senators who's home with COVID.
Yeah, that's why we're all, a lot of us are masking. So I don't know how the two of you want to divide it, but I'll leave it to you and just introduce yourselves for the record and then tell us your thoughts on this new draft.
Great, thank you. So for the record, Mark Anderson, Wyndham County Sheriff, I'm the president of the Vermont Sheriff's Association. I guess I'm gonna lead off with a question, which is,
Sure.
because we just received this draft,
Yes,
I was
I
kind
know.
of prepared to testify to draft 1.3. I know it's late in the day. Would it be better for us to just come back after we have an opportunity to actually absorb the material here? A lot's changed.
Yeah, that I totally appreciate that. And we do have this bill on our agenda for tomorrow. I didn't want to make you drive up again. We had hoped to get to this sooner today, but as I know you appreciate, both of you, we had to take a lot of time working through our dispatch bill. So if you're able to come, and you can certainly Zoom in, you don't need to come back in person. If you want to talk to us today, so you don't have to come back, however you want to do it. Where are we at with schedule for tomorrow?
Really, really full.
We are really, really full. Okay. So we're doing 2 bills tomorrow again too, and we're gonna have bills on the floor. So what about Friday?
We have some time Friday. It looks like we're gonna be done around 3 or 3:15.
Okay.
30 Friday.
If you have initial thoughts, I know you just saw it, so I don't necessarily I understand it won't be fully baked. But if you have initial thoughts that might be helpful, that would be great. Then we'll put you on our schedule for tomorrow, both of you. And I guess I would suggest you Zoom in instead of calling or instead of driving, unless you want to stay and drive, just in case we have to move things around. And then we'll look at Friday too, to have you back in for a little bit on Friday. Does that make sense, or is that feasible for you all?
That works for me.
Okay. Sheriff Harlow, is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay,
I'll be the backup.
you'll be the backup, okay. So we'll have failover, you're the failover?
So redundancy.
You're the redundancy.
Yes. R is for Roger and redundancy.
Redundant Roger, oh my goodness, okay, so before we, sorry, okay, go ahead, Sheriff Anderson.
I think I said this, but for the record, Mark Anderson, Wyndham County Sheriff and President of Vermont Sheriff's Association. These will, I'm not even gonna say they're half-baked comments, it's my gut feeling, just as thoughts.
For it, thank you.
Section 2, I don't think we have any initial comments?
That's just reorganizing something.
Right, and I don't think that'll be an issue. With regards to the auditors, because that does survive from 1.3, there's, so the Sheriff's Association already receives audits, I should say, members of the Sheriff's Association, so the Sheriff's Department's already receive audits. There's no issue with that. The issue we identify in this is that as it stands right now, the auditor's office can, at its whim, say we're going to conduct an audit. That's roughly a $20,000 expense for my department. Which means that they said tomorrow, not to say, I'm gonna say this somewhat like egregious, but tomorrow they say we want to do an audit, and then 2 weeks later, they say we want to do another audit, and then 2 weeks later, another audit, there's 60 grand.
Right.
My department doesn't have the ability to do that, and generally speaking, a department where we are concerned about financials, we want to make sure that the department has the wherewithal to do that, because at the end of the day, the people we're auditing are the ones who don't have money.
So is there a change in here from current law about the frequency of audits? I don't think there is.
My understanding based on this language is that it would allow the auditor to come in at their prerogative.
Where do you see that?
18, page 4, is that what you're talking about?
I thought this was pretty similar to current law, though.
Yeah, I don't think that this is just, that this is procedures to notify the auditor when a sheriff.
No, I'm talking with regards to page 5, line 5.
Page 5, line 5.
Auditor accounts and the auditor's designee may at any time examine the records, accounts, books, papers, contracts, reports, and other materials of the county sheriff's department as they pertain to the financial transactions, obligations, assets, receipts of the department. The auditor shall charge for any associated costs in the same manner as prescribed in 32 VSA 168B.
So that those first 4 lines, or 5 through 8, is current law. That already may at any time. They already may at any time.
Yes.
And then the second part, I understand, is a change, and that is a change in the cost, or who pays for it. So that is a change, but I don't think there is a change of when they would audit.
My read is that they can do that at any time.
Right, they can, under current law, audit you at any time.
So the issue at hand for us is that when we budget for this, it's on a preset schedule, so we always know when to budget for it, and that's
Right.
raised. If this can be at any time, that's not on a preset schedule. That is, tomorrow I get a phone call from the auditor's office saying we're coming in and write the check.
I know, I hear you, but this is current law. At any time is current law. That's already in the statute.
I understand.
So that's not changing it.
No, and I'm not disagreeing with that. What I'm
Okay.
saying is that it's the language that's deleted from line 9 to 11 that does change the frequency at which that is occurring. Because this is occurring when an incumbent leaves office, and what that's doing is just deleting it. So it's simply saying at any time.
So my read on this language is they may do it at any time, and they must do it when an incumbent sheriff leaves office.
Yeah, exactly.
So it doesn't, they still can do it at any time. We're simply taking away the fact that they must do it when an incumbent sheriff leaves.
Yeah.
Except the difference in my interpretation, not to say I disagree with you, Senator, my interpretation of this is that they have the authority to review our books. They can walk in and say, we're here to look at QuickBooks. That's okay. But engaging an outside external auditor, which is what occurs when the incumbent sheriff leaves office, is the portion that's deleted, and that's what costs $20,000.
Yeah.
So having the deputy auditor Ash, come into my office and say, we're concerned that you're up to monkey business, he could come look at that, and if there is monkey business, then they can sound the alarms that they sound. At hand here is an audit that will be completed at the switchover of a sheriff, and that's what triggers 32 VSA 168B.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
I think we're reading it differently,
Mhm.
so we'll try to get clarity, and we'll talk with Tim and the auditor.
So I'm reading this as you having to do less audits.
Yes, that's how I read this as well.
Yeah, not more audits, but that, if that's the case, That would surprise me if I'm on that side even, but this is how maybe, yeah.
And it becomes confusing because we want to see that transitional audit. When I came into my office, I wanted to have a record that shows this is what was done beforehand. So there's an independent analysis, which it appears this would delete, though I'm not sure if it moved elsewhere. Again, these are raw comments.
Okay, well, we hear you and we will check into this to see what the intent from the auditor's office is. Okay.
Moving to page 6, section C, or line 4. I think our initial position remains the same. But again, I haven't talked over with the sheriffs, a lot has changed there. So I think I'm just gonna flag this as we're gonna wanna have continued testimony.
And I will say this new language about the 5%, what is listed that it can be used for was what you listed. It came from your testimony.
And that's understood. As I'm reading it, it seems to create more administrative responsibility for me, which then will be audited. Which I already have a lot of administrative responsibility, but that's a separate conversation. So
Okay.
I think we're going to want to come back to that one, but generally I don't think that the Sheriff's Association's position has changed. We have provided testimony that shows that we are undercompensated in comparison to other law enforcement officers in the state of relatively similar responsibilities. I understand that there will be a report on that to follow, but it seems that we're giving away before the report's done. Just it's my guess again, I do want to talk to the association to see where they feel.
Okay.
Section F, if I understood correctly, this move.
This is the statewide
No,
contract.
this is obligation. So my initial read of it is that, I'm not sure if it's section F or if I saw it later. It effectively requires the sheriff to it requires the sheriff to provide law enforcement security services to the courthouses, but then it says it's contracted. I don't understand why a contract would be created. We don't contract for state paid deputies to do transports. So now it's creating a negotiation for something that we're required to do, which then raises the question, what if we have a negotiation in that say?
So it's added to your duty, the sheriff's duties to, and that's on page 8, paragraph C, that the sheriffs have to provide, or no, I'm sorry, B, the county at courthouse security for state and county courthouses. And this is about, in the provision of those duties, it has to be through a statewide contract. And that was the conversation about not having 14 different contracts with the judiciary.
And so what I'm thinking out loud, what I'm saying is that we're required to do it just like we're required to transport prisoners, but then it's saying, in addition to your obligation to do this, create a contract.
Well,
So that's
a
included.
contract is the way to pay for it.
The state deputies are paid for already, and the state's already paying for the judicial security services. And so it just seems that we're creating additional administrative responsibility for something that the state's acknowledging fiscal responsibility for, and now it's defining an office's authority for. I'm not sure what we're negotiating. I understand it could be numbers of people, it could be, it just seems we already have a simpler process in place in discussing allocation of money as well as positions through an appropriations process, which the process we're all going to follow.
I'm confused because what we heard from both you and the judiciary, what we heard from the judiciary is that they are frustrated because sheriff's departments are not always providing security and that they can't operate courthouses sometimes because there's not security there. And so they want a statewide contract so that it's ensured that there would be county and state courthouse security in every courthouse. And what we heard from you collectively, sheriffs, not necessarily specifically you, was that you don't always have the people or the money to provide that security. And so we were trying to say, this is a priority that courthouses have security. It's also important that sheriffs get paid to do it. And so that would be what the contract would negotiate, is the rate and the details of that payment.
It still creates, I think it creates complexity, where we have systems that are already existing. I'm using the state deputies as examples where we have funding through the Department of State Attorneys and Sheriffs to fund those positions for the purpose of moving personnel.
Right, so those state deputies, the transport desk deputies, right? Those are state positions, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so that is an option that we talked about, of creating more state deputies that would be state positions. I don't know if creating more state positions is possible, but we can certainly look into that as an option.
So one of the issues the Sheriff's Association has had, or sheriff's departments had, and I'll use my department as an example, in 2016, we had a discussion through our contract discussion with the court administrator's office to say, you're currently reimbursing us at a rate that's losing us $1,000 a day.
Right, so that's what we heard from you, and that's what we were trying to address with this.
Yeah, so my question becomes based on the requirement or the responsibility added to section B on page 8. So the sheriff's responsibility to do that, we're being told we shall do that. But then what happens when the court administrator's office says, or the judiciary says, well, we disagree with the rate that you say it costs you to do business.
You negotiate until you make an agreement, because you're obligated to pay to do that service.
And I would be happy to provide my attempts to do that, in which it was not responded to. So this is a frustration that we have with communication, but no less, I mean, that's part of my reaction to the language.
Okay, I will talk to the judiciary about this. Okay. Senator White.
Thank you. So I think that it is possible for you to have the responsibility to do this and to be able to negotiate the contract. I think those two things can exist together, but I think your point is well taken. And like, if you're required to do it and they come back with peanuts, then you get forced to still do it. And I don't think that is how it would actually happen with this language. It's really, the ball is more in your court, in my view, when I read the language, than in the judiciary's court.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we added, the language that says adequately
That makes
address the cost of providing law enforcement or security services.
They have to use you.
And I understand,
So-
yeah, no, it might be creating complexity, it might not be, I don't know.
No, but I hear your point. It's like, but now they go, okay, great, we'll get somebody else. You know, and now it's like, no, they have to use you.
Yeah, and I asked Tim about putting something in the judiciary's statute, and he said that would be redundant. It's already here, it's the law. So the judiciary has to follow the law. The irony is,
Yeah.
I don't know.
What was already there, Chair?
If the judiciary didn't follow the law.
No, you said it was RL.
It's already in.
We're gonna have open discussion on this afterwards, just between committee here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Sheriff Markku.
Roger Mark, for the record, one other thing, if you're gonna talk to the judiciary, one of the reasons that sheriffs are not providing people for certain courts and everything is because we can't find anyone.
Yeah.
We can't find anybody because we're basing this on a 1970s, well, part-time, let's get some part-time people. That doesn't work anymore. People want to know that they have job security.
Right.
So that's why we're somewhat successful in the prisoner transport, because those folks have full-time jobs with security and benefits.
Yes. Okay, I hear you, Sheriff. I'm sorry, I think I'm leaving losing by Allison, and Senator White. So we are losing quorum. So we are gonna have to pick this up tomorrow, and I'm sorry. But if whoever is able to come back in whatever form works for you guys, it would be helpful to have at least one of you here tomorrow. We will not have a new draft by tomorrow. It will still be this one. So if you want to think more on it, and if you have proposed language changes specific, that's the point we're at right now. So thank you all. We can go off live